My name is Izzy Eisenrich, and today we will be discussing why Anna Sexton should be included into the English 2025 curriculum. Poetry has been a release for many poets' emotions and hardships for many years, so it was no surprise to the poetry community when Sexton incorporated her personal life into her poetry. But what set Sexton apart from the other poets was her highly personal and confessional verse poetry. Her poetry included many intimate details from her private life and gave way to showing a side of herself that most would have kept hidden. Here's why Sexton's work was so compelling.
Most famous poets. Her passionate and extraordinarily personal poetry about madness, sexuality and death had brought her academic acclaim, public notoriety, and a place in the canon of the emerging feminist movement.
Born November 9, 1928 in Massachusetts, Sexton's life had always been an uphill battle.
Coming of age in post-war America, Sexton, like many women of her generation, saw marriage and children as her primary ambition. But the reality of suburban life and the stress of two small daughters proved too much for her, and at the age of 28 she went into therapy after suffering the first of what were to be many mental breakdowns. It was while in therapy that she started to write poetry, initially at the suggestion of her therapist. It was to prove her lifeline. In an age where poets like Lowell and Snodgrass were making confessional poetry respectable, even acclaimed, Sexton's poetic confessions were riveting. Her breakdowns, her relationship with her family, her numerous affairs, and her obsession with suicide all went into print. Her work won her a host of awards, including the Pulitzer, and her performance of it made her a star.
Sexton's poetry was a way of coping for herself, but at the same time she produced works that inspired many, some of which included Live or Die, which won her a Pulitzer Prize in 1967. Ahead of her time, Sexton also wrote works that inspired the feminine movement. The poem titled Menstruation at 40 demonstrated her influences on the times. Even after her suicide in 1974, the following year more of her work was released, titled The Awful Rowing Toward God, which included one of her most recognized poems, 45th Mercy Street. Taking a look further into one of Sexton's famous works, The Truth the Dead Know, here is a recording of a reading she performed of it.
For my mother, born March 1902, died March 1959, and my father, born February 1900, died June 1959. Gone, I say, and walk from church, refusing the stiff procession to the grave, letting the dead ride alone in the hearse. It is June. I am tired of being brave. We drive to the Cape. I cultivate myself where the sun gutters from the sky, where the sea swings in like an iron gate, and we touch. In another country, people die. My darling, the wind falls in like stones from the white-hearted water, and when we touch, we enter touch entirely. No one's alone. Men kill for this or for as much. And what of the dead? They lie without shoes in their stone boats. They are more like stone than the sea would be if it stopped. They refuse to be blessed, throat, eye, and knucklebone.
Let's look at the first stanza of this piece. The speaker begins by addressing her own actions and emotions. Without any prior knowledge of what this piece is about, one is still able to assume that the speaker has just attended a funeral. The speaker says to herself, "Gone." It is as if she is trying to finalize what has happened and finish this mourning period. The last line of this section clearly states two facts in the speaker's lives. It is June, the month of Sexton's father's death, and she is tired of being brave. As mentioned previously, she has reached a point where she no longer wants to face the grieving family and fill the role of mourning a loved one she is meant to play. In the second stanza, Sexton makes another reference to her personal life, dive to the Cape. This reference is made to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, an area of this state Sexton was familiar with. It is also in this stanza that the speaker tells her listener that she has plans for herself and one another. In the third stanza, Sexton begins by referring to her companion as her darling. It is clear that this person means a great deal to her. They are someone she is able to depend on after the deaths of her parents. In the fourth stanza, the speaker returns to the dead. She questions herself and her listeners, asking, "And what of the dead?" This is a rhetorical question, as she knows very well what happens to them. In the final lines, she emphasizes the fact that the dead are nothing more than stone. They are less alive than the sea would be if it stopped. It is as the ocean would still have life within it somewhere. Sexton concludes the piece with the statement that the dead refuse to be improved, blessed, or moved by anyone's appeal. They are solid and still no matter what one does or says. It is with these lines that she dismisses any need to mourn or think of those who have passed on. They are nothing now that their souls are gone. Anna Sexton encompasses several important themes in this lyric. The most important theme of the poem is death. The dedication of the poem tells the reader it is going to be a eulogy for the dead parents of the poet. So the major focus goes on their graves. The poet, while walking through the graveyard, broads over death as a whole. She is disheartened, and instead of focusing solely on her dead mother and father, she goes beyond the bounds and welcomes the grief of others regarding death into her own heart. When looking at Sexton's work in depth, it is easy to realize the struggles that she faced in life. In her short years, and even after her passing, she has inspired many in the feminist movement and in her confessional verse poetry.